I'm going to start recording right now.
Awesome. Let's get started.
Prior to pole vaulting, how did you get your start in gymnastics?
Yeah, I mean, gymnastics is one of those sports that you start very young. So we moved so I was actually born on the Gold Coast and I moved in Australia. Moved to New Zealand and started gymnastics probably around the age of 4 or 5, which is quite common in the sport. And I remember starting with my brother, who also got into gymnastics around the same time as me. And we sort of turned up and they did like a pre-conditioning sort of circuit to try and get all the different little athlete kids into the sport. From normally start off as like a recreational level and then progress into competitive. And we got there and did the conditioning circuits to find out what group we would be into. And we pretty much got sort of thrown straight into the competitive level because of where our strength was at for our age. So yeah, I was about 5 years old when I got into gymnastics as a sport. I just had so much energy as a little kid that I think my parents didn't know what to do with me. So sort of progressed that into the gym and was able to use that for something else. And that was gymnastics at the time of just a little 5-year-old. And obviously that progressed pretty quickly into a teenager, but that's how I started out originally, yeah.
What was your best event gymnastics wise?
Ooh, I'd say probably the bars. So it's vault, bars, beam and floor. And that was one that I just, especially towards the end of my career, I started to really enjoy going from the top bar onto the low bar and just doing some like pretty funky tricks. And yeah, I'd say probably the bars. Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there is a huge takeaway from the uneven bars to the propelling motion of pole vaulting. Was that a pretty easy transition to make?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of pole vaulters are ex-gymnasts, which is really interesting, going into the sport and finding out that there are a lot of other athletes just like me who had transitioned from the same sport. My transition kind of came from one of my gymnastics teammates starting before me as well. So that's how I sort of transitioned. But I mean, the similarities from a lot of different events, like the bars is one of the ones which is surprisingly not as similar to pole vault. I'd say probably the vault and I don't know, some of the floor aspects and even beam, but I think there's so many different things that can be taken from gymnastics into pole vaulting. Like it's one of those sports that really sets you up foundation wise. So I've sort of gone from creating all this like strength and speed and training 20 hours a week to then go into pole vaulting, which you need strength, speed, agility, like all this sort of power that is just transitioned into a different sport. So it almost just worked out so well, where I was able to find something that had such a similar aspect, whether it was the strength side of it, whether it was being upside down, like the thrilling action of it. Like they're both pretty, you got to be pretty fearless in both those sports. So I think that created like a very happy medium and a easier transition, even though there are a few different things that made that transition a little bit harder as to how I got into it as well.
So you said that there was a teammate of yours who kind of introduced you to pole vaulting, right?
Yeah.
And then there was who else that tagged you as potentially a good pole vaulter?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously pole vault isn't one of those sports that you fall into. Like it's quite an unusual sport. So it's like one of the questions I get a lot, but it's just one of those things that so many things went into it just happening to, I mean, I'm a big believer in things happening for a reason. And I think getting into pole vaulting and the story of how I got into it was very fitting for that, I believe. So I guess from gymnastics, like I grew up with one of my teammates, Imogen, and she she had been doing athletics for a long time. Myself, I'd never done anything besides gymnastics, really. So she sort of started into pole vaulting after gymnastics. So she was one of the ones that I kind of saw that she was doing that, and that's where she'd gone afterwards. And I knew that after my gymnastics career, I would definitely want to do something else in sport. So pretty much straight after I quit, I was like, right, what other sport can I be doing? So between her starting a few months before me, but then also the coach that I have now, Jeremy McCall, he used to do gymnastics. It's all connected. He did gymnastics, but then also had like a little bit of a weightlifting background. And he actually turned up to our school and did a school visit, which we still do a little bit every now and then, where it's kind of like a exhibition on pole vaulting. So he'll take some of the athletes or some of the school kids and try get them to get into the sport a little bit more. So I was there one of the days, which unfortunately at the time, that's when my back still wasn't doing very well. So I didn't get to try it out, but I remember after he'd done it with the rest of the class, he was saying, does anyone have any questions? And I was sort of like, little Olivia. I was like, do you think I would still be able to do it like with a sore back or like an injured back? And he was like, yeah, of course. And asked me to come along and try it. And that was sort of when I realized, right, this is maybe one of those sports that would be quite similar. Like I saw him sort of flinging our students around the hall and going upside down. I was like, yeah, I'm going to give that one a go. So everything kind of just fit into place between Imogen and Jeremy, and then getting to see the Millennium, which is one of the best facilities we have in the Northern Hemisphere. So it all fell into place, and yeah, I'm grateful that it did it for that time.
So we'll talk about the back injury now. 2014, and you credit that injury as paving the way for your pole vaulting career. What kind of injury was it, and why do you think that it led the way into this next phase of your life?
Yeah, so from gymnastics, well, I guess my injury was 3 stress fractures in my back. Which stress fractures are very common in gymnastics. Like it's almost uncommon to get out of the sport without them. But for me to have 3, and one of them was sort of due to the fact that when I was born, my L5 was connected to my sacrum. So the little parts that go off your spine was connected onto a part of my back where it isn't normally. So through many years of gymnastics, and I guess the impact, the loading, the twisting, it broke off that bit. So there's a little bit of floating bone in there, which was in there for a while and actually only just healed completely more recently. But yeah, I guess those stress fractures are eventually what led me to have to stop gymnastics, which was a very interesting time, I guess, coming back to that identity piece as well. It was what I'd connected myself to as a gymnast, sort of just Livy the gymnast. So I guess from there, I went to a lot of different doctors trying to figure out what it was. It was a few different years we figured that out pretty much. It was on the scan 2 years before I stopped gymnastics. And within those 2 years, it wasn't until we got another scan on my back that they actually realized what it was that was going on in there, which was a lot worse than we had thought. And towards the end of my career, when I was about 14, that's when, it sounds weird saying end of my career at so young, but that's when we realized it was actually quite bad. Like I'd be walking around or standing up, sitting down for longer than 15, 20 minutes, and it would be like really painful. I remember even just jogging around the gym for warm up, and it was really bad. And that's when we realized we had to go see, at the time, was the doctor and the spinal surgeon, pretty much saying I'll never do gymnastics ever again, which was really, really weird to fathom, because it's everything I'd ever known as a kid, really. But at the time, it was trying to figure out what it was going to be doing, going back into it. And that was, like I said, finding another sport. And I mean, there's a quote that one of my spinal surgeons comes back to.
I don't know if you can hear this, but it is literally monsoon raining, and it just started.
Really?
Can you hear the rain?
Not really, no.
Okay, good, because I am so sorry, but I did not hear the last, like, maybe 15 seconds of what you just said, because a monsoon just started outside my window.
Oh my gosh. I'll go back over that part.
The last thing I heard you say was that they told you that your career would have to stop at age 14. And that was the last thing I heard. So I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. As long as you still hear me now.
No, you're good now. That was insane.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I guess being told that I had to finish my career at age 14, and that was what I thought I would be going to Olympics in. That's what I thought the rest of my career would look like as an athlete. And one of the quotes that I guess one of those surgeons at the time said, which is out there, is it's easier to fix a broken back than it is a broken spirit. And I thought that was just so interesting. Like, after having no hope from that doctor, and he just point blank said, "You'll never do gymnastics again," to seeing this other person and him saying that pretty much free reign, go do whatever you would like, whatever's going to make you happy, and we can fix it up afterwards if we have to, kind of gave me that all go ahead to start another sport. And in that time, like I said before, like, everything sort of pointed towards that being pole vaulting, and that's why I look back on this sort of injury happening from gymnastics as almost one of the best things that happened to me, because if that didn't happen, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be in a different sport. Like, I don't know if I would still be doing gymnastics. My body probably would have given out in some other way. So I don't know, it's just funny how things like that can happen in life, and at the time you think it's possibly not one of the worst things, but like a really tough thing to go through. And then looking back now with a little bit more perspective, you're able to see that it's possibly one of the best things that happened, and everything fit into place, and those fractures have sort of healed now, whether it's physically but also metaphorically. It's one of those things that I've just had to deal with. I still do manage my back injuries, but I guess transitioning into pole vaulting, I've been able to get a really good team around me to keep that together, I guess. Yeah.
Is 14 on the younger side of entrance into pole vaulting, or were you already working at a kind of deficit?
I'd say 14. It's hard to know in other countries. I think probably in other countries it would probably be possibly a little bit younger. But at the same time, it's one of those sports that varies quite a lot. Like, I guess with gymnastics, you're looking at 4 or 5-year-olds, but in pole vaulting, it's normally a little bit older. So you already have that strength base. So I'd say 14 is probably around the right age. In New Zealand, that's when most of our development athletes coming through as well.
And then how did you get on Team New Zealand's radar? Because you were so new to the sport.
Yeah. It happened so quickly. Like, the trend between the transition of like a few different months of struggling with trying to get my back in the right place, to, I think it was like a year later, I had my first, or even less than that, my first competition overseas in Australia, which was the Australian Junior Championships, where I actually did quite well. I think I got third at that time, which is where that sort of ticked off a little bit more. I was still doing some really small heights. And then the season after that is when everything came together, which was the season of 2016-17, where I broke the under 17 New Zealand record, which is sort of one of those things that blew up majorly, which I had no idea it would. And it was such a big shift for me, I think, like realizing that people are actually really interested in the sport, and there's something that I can actually go far in it. And with gymnastics, it was so hard to see that, because you look at all the bigger athletes being from America and China, and I was sort of like just little old me. But in pole vaulting, and after doing that, that height of 4 meters 22, 4 meters 30 at the time, it just propelled me onto, I don't know, I was having media interviews, I was having all these different things that I just had no idea was even part of the sport, that I was sort of just thrown into, which was really exciting. And I think that year is when I realized that there are a lot of different things that I can be doing, and going on to, I guess, the New Zealand team, so to say. We sort of see the New Zealand team, or Team NZ, as your first time wearing New Zealand on your chest. So for me, that would have been probably not until 2018. So I had a few years to get into it. Funnily enough, I had I had World Junior Championships and Commonwealth Games in the same year in 2018, which, I mean, you don't normally go to Commonwealth Games before you go to a World Juniors, which already was a little bit random, but I guess starting with that record and having Eliza pave that way, and I think that's sort of why it blew up so much, was because Eliza McCartney had got that bronze medal the year before as well, so there was a lot more media and attention around that. But I guess it sort of started around that time of getting that record, and then transitioning into what was the next 2 years of a really big moment for, I guess, a 16 to 18-year-old.
So that U17 record put you third in the world.
Wow, yeah.
That's insane, especially as a 17-year-old. How did you handle that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the domestic season, we normally start, our heights are the first ones to go on to the world stage as Kiwis, pretty much, because not many others compete between, I guess, December and January. So that's how we kind of came onto that. But that being a height that was fairly okay for the time going into the new year. The pressure was something that I had to deal with almost straight away. It was something that I wasn't accustomed to. It was something that I almost had to deal with as it was coming along for me, which was a really interesting experience, because no one set me up for what was about to come for me. It was, and I mean, I look back, it was quite funny, because one of the things that I remember was taking those media interviews and calls, and even doing a few like on the news and things like that. I used to be so terrified, and I'd like to think a few other people would agree with me. I think it's maybe part of the personality, but I was terrified of phone calls. Like anytime that like someone would, I don't know about terrified, but anytime that someone would call me, I'd just like sort of freeze up and not really know what to say, or like going to call a takeaway place, I would be like, can I please get this? Like I was just so small and so like naive and so little, and it was just so weird to see that like I was literally thrown into the deep end on taking these phone calls and getting into the media and all these sorts of things going around at once, that the pressure, I guess, wasn't really something that I knew would be coming into a little bit later. So that pressure piece was just trying to keep to my processes and keep to not getting so caught out in the outcome. But at the same time, there are like a few other competitions where it was a lot harder to do that. Like you see your name up on a scoreboard and you're currently in third, or you're currently in second place, and or fourth, and you see, if I get this jump, then it's going to propel me into third place, and you're like, oh, that means a medal. And then I get very like I don't know, caught up in that a little bit, rather than just like sticking to what I had to do. But with the pressure thing as well, I think given the fact that Eliza had paved that way before me, a lot of the time I didn't really feel as though I was able to, I guess, be in my own footsteps. Like I was always constantly kind of compared to Eliza. Like even that under 17 record was blown up so much because of Eliza, which sort of made it hard for me to create my own journey without that being something like at the forefront. Like in New Zealand, when anyone thinks of pole vaulting, it's, oh, so you know Eliza McCartney, or you know, like do you train with her or anything like that. So I think the pressure was something that I didn't really know how to deal with until I had to be front faced with it. And not many people, I guess, have that comparison to someone else at that young age. And I think that meant I had to grow up a lot quicker. It meant I had, I guess, more responsibilities, but at the same time, it was more opportunities. So I had more opportunities because it was Eliza who was paved that way. I had more things I could be a part of. It came to sponsorships. It came to all these different things that allowed me those opportunities at a young age, but also had a weird pressure aspect because I was always being compared to someone else, I think.
And did Team New Zealand help you with that kind of media conversation? And I mean, was there like a crash course on how to speak to media members? Because for all accounts and purposes, you were a young teenager trying to suddenly take in this fame that you were not prepared for.
Yeah, we have a really good program in New Zealand, which at the time I think it was on Pathway to Podium, and like a PPS sort of program where there are a bunch of different things when it comes to like physio support, media as well. But it was interesting because they were also dealing with a similar thing to me in terms of we didn't know this was going to happen, and it wasn't something that was preconceived at all, and it just kind of all came at once. So I didn't at the time, and for like almost a year I didn't really have any media training, which was interesting because I remember for one of my sponsors, Toyota, when I'd just come on with them originally, they did I think it was when we were doing the ad for, I don't know, just a little bit about my story and the Start Your Impossible campaign. And I remember talking to one of the directors, and my mum was there at the time, and he said, don't get Olivia any media training yet. Like they'll be telling her what to say. They'll be like sort of giving her all these pinpoint things, and she'll sort of just become more static in how she's talking. Whereas right now, she actually has like a really good way of like talking to the media and being able to get across her point of view. And that was really interesting to hear for me, that I kind of already had a little bit of that in me, because I never saw that. I was always just, scared to talk on the telephone. Whereas now I was thrown into it, which was almost a good thing. Looking back, like I was able to start talking about my story in a way that worked well for me, in a way that was able to get across like the actual raw, whether it's the raw emotion, whether it was explaining my perspective. So after that, I did get a little bit of media training, obviously a little bit throughout my career. Athletics New Zealand were able to get me onto like a bunch of different courses. I had ANZ who was helping me with that. So again, a lot of opportunities came after that. It was just the original trying to get into it and understanding what that was like, and talking about my story. And one of the things that's really interesting is I remember when I first started pole vaulting, or earlier on, I would dream about being interviewed, which was really weird. Like I would just imagine that feeling of whether it was at a competition and someone like wanting to know your story and like trying to understand it. And I would go through things in my head of like what I would say and what I was talking about. And for that to sort of like come to fruition and come to life and have people actually wanting to know my story was really exciting. And I think that's where it sort of came from, that rawness and actually understanding how I can talk about that as well.
So less than 6 months into starting your pole vaulting career, there was a bronze medal at the Australian Junior Championship. And then you broke the record.
Yeah, so I think it was 2014 I started. 2015 is when I had that little junior championship. And then 2016-17 was when that under 17 record sort of blew everything up. Yeah.
And then 2018, you were just talking about the Commonwealth Games, a 9th place finish. For all accounts and purposes, a solid start to your career. At that point, you had been there a couple years. How had your perspective changed?
When I went into the Commonwealth Games?
In 2018.
2018. I think originally qualifying for the games was pretty big for me. At the time, I had already jumped the height to qualify without needing to try chase it, which was one of those really good things as well, because I've now realized throughout my career it's really hard to like chase heights. So a lot of that was, I don't know, again, having that as one of my first major internationals at 18 years old, being the youngest on the team, was, I guess I went into it with a perspective of just going to learn, going to have not that much expectation as well. I knew that Eliza had quite a bit of expectation going into it, so I was kind of underneath her, and to be there competing with her was really awesome, because I could sort of feed off what she was doing whilst trying to understand who I was as an athlete at the time, and just go into an experience and have fun with it. Which I look back on, and I think it would be easier for me to do that now, but back at the time I still had that, and I still do, but that grit and determination to want to do well, which may have got a little bit caught up in me at the time, of little 18-year-old me wanting to do really well, but at the same time knowing that I'm fresh to the sport, I'm a new face, and I still had a lot to learn, and that was one of those big experiences that allowed me that opportunity to learn and to be on a New Zealand team and to represent my country and understand all those sorts of things. Again, at such a pretty quick pace. I hadn't even had time to, I had a few years after that, but it was just understanding what it's like to be on an international stage, be at a major competition, learning all those sorts of things at the Commonwealth Games, at my birthplace on the Gold Coast, was what made it really, really special for me as well, is how much went into it. Like, I'm so grateful that that was my first major international and like the start of my career, because I was there to be able to compete with my brother. I was there with Eliza. My family was there, and it almost felt like a home stadium or a home event for me, which is really, really special. So I went into a lot of that with learning and experience, and came out with 9th place. Like, I kind of would have liked a top 8 finish, but I mean, I learned a lot from it in terms of getting that on count back and getting those first attempts rather than third attempts, and trying to pole vault the same as I normally would in training, or from other competitions that I had. It was an amazing learning experience for where I was at that age. Yeah.
From the mental perspective, how did you balance the determination that you had and the records and podium visits that you'd already accrued with continuing to have fun?
It's something I'm still learning. And I'm definitely getting there a lot more. But I think one of the main things that attaches to that is coming back to why you do it, knowing what your why is. And I didn't even quite pinpoint that until I was probably 20, in my early 20s, still am. But coming back to why you do it, a lot of that is, I mean, two things for me is I know what I'm capable of. I feel like I have a lot in me to be able to do well as a pole vaulter, and have that determination and grit that's going to keep me going, to have hopefully a really successful career. But then also coming back to having fun. And it seems like such a cliche and so simple, and one of those things that I'd say a lot of athletes say, but that's the reason why we do it at the end of the day, is because we're enjoying it, because it's something that sparks our passion, and for it to turn into a sport and to turn into almost a job, to be loving what you do and being able to do it every single day and pretty much creating it, making it your whole world, your whole life, is such a amazing opportunity in itself, and not many people can say that. So I think making the absolute most of it, and being able to, I guess, balance that pressure alongside it is coming back into what I say is like almost the zone that you want to be in, that mental zone of understanding, I guess, how it is that you can have two different perspectives, one being looking at the medals and the accolades and the podiums and everything like that, and then also understanding what it is to be in the process. So that sort of process outcome is something that I'm still learning about, but being able to come back to why you're doing what you're doing, even if it's as much as process in on a few different steps, process in on the takeoff, or breathing at the end of the runway has been one of those things that I've come back into it. It's just taking 3 deep breaths before I start my approach, because that's what's going to center me a lot more. And I think as an athlete, you're always learning what it is that works best for you. What works best for me in 2018 doesn't work for me now, which might not work for me when I'm 26, which makes it really difficult, but also makes it fun to be learning who you are as an athlete and a person that can be dealing with different pressures, dealing with different circumstances that sort of come your way, and understanding what it is that is going to work for you and what it is that you can play around with, and not getting too stuck in your ways, because I guess we're always changing as people. So that means we're always changing as athletes as well.
Walk me through that process on competition day. When do you wake up? What is the process going into getting to the track? And then half an hour ahead, and then when you're staring the runway down, what's going through your head? Just walk me through the whole day.
Through the whole day. A competition day, like I said, it's changed quite a bit, and even recently I've changed that slightly. But I guess the day before, we find out when our competition start will be. So say I had a 4 p.m. or a 2 p.m. start, I work my way back from that. So I want to be getting ready like an hour before that. In the morning, I try to do an activation. So if there's a period where there's 6 hours, that isn't too early in the morning, that I'm sort of waiting, I try to do an activation to get my muscles moving, and to get my brain sort of firing into that mode, which I probably do at like 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning. And then from there, I've realized that I used to think that I had to be so on for like the whole entire day. And I had to be like comp mode, like let's get ready as soon as I wake up, like let's go competition. But I've now realized that I definitely need some chill time in the morning, and throughout the day, so that I can almost like save that excitement for later. So I think during the day, I'll do the activation, come back home and have a few hours where I'm barely doing anything, whether it's not so much on my phone, but whether it's reading, whether it's just watching TV, keeping my mind sort of occupied almost on something else. And then I start to get ready and this has also come into my routine recently, as going for a walk by myself. So I'll probably go for like a 15, maybe possibly pushing 20-minute walk, where I almost visualize what I'm doing for the day, and the things that I want to be feeling on the runway, I feel on a pavement, like walking towards, I don't know, the dairy or something like that, to just clear my mind, allow myself to start to come into that zone a little bit more after having that downtime. I'll get back home and then start going to the track, and one of the listening to music really pumps me up quite a bit. So before, when I'm getting ready, it's like really fun, happy music. And then when I'm in the car, it sort of turns to more like sort of hard hitting, bit of AC/DC, bit of Linkin Park, to get me more amped up. And my song, which has almost been attached to me now. It's been told by quite a few other people, is Thunderstruck by AC/DC. So I always listen to that as my last song before getting to the track. So every single time, no matter who's covering, what we're doing, I'll say, right, are we about 5 minutes from the track? We need to put Thunderstruck on right now. And I get to the track and I feel amped up from that. That's sort of my routine in that sense. When I'm at the track, we then do like a half an hour general warm-up. So in that, it's just some drills, doing a little bit of a jog around, getting the body moving. And in that time, I like to just be talking to my teammates and sort of soaking in where it is that I'm competing. And then I'll take a caffeine gum to get that sort of first caffeine hit started before competition. And then as pole vaulters, we get 1 hour of pit warm-up. So 1 hour of actually pole vaulting before we start competing. Now that's probably more of half an hour. When I was younger, I would take the full hour to pretty much do a whole pole vaulting session. And now I'm like, right, we can't be doing that. We're getting a little bit older. We need to save that energy. And through that time, it's actually really interesting in terms of like what you connect your warm-up in competition to. Sometimes if you have a bad warm-up, you would connect it to competition and try to let it affect you. Whereas now I know that I've got that experience. I can have a really bad warm-up in a good competition or a really good warm-up and not the best competition. Like they don't really correlate, which is something I've learned over the years. But then after that warm-up, it's a little bit of waiting time for the other athletes. And then it's pretty much my time on the runway, which at that point, it's a little bit of getting the legs moving if I've been waiting for a bit, and then getting my mind in that zone of, right, let's go. Let's get these competition nerves that come into it as well, which I love. Like I definitely encourage those nerves to be coming on and dealing with them. Like when I was younger, it was a little bit scary, whereas now I'm like, yes, I'm feeling nervous. Like this is a really good thing to get excited for, even like the smallest of meets. And then do my little pre-comp routine on the runway, which is sort of on the runway, looking the other way, 2 stomps of the feet, 3 deep breaths, and then away I go. So that's definitely been developed a lot over the years, but that's a little bit in a nutshell of how I'll get ready for a competition and what it feels like on the runway. So there's a lot of like up and down of knowing that you're not always up here. Those arousal levels need to be balanced, and learning that over the years has been really interesting.
Yeah, speaking of that kind of equilibrium of arousal and also things like pre-performance anxiety, how does Team New Zealand handle the mental health side of elite athletics?
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of those subjects that's definitely come on board a lot more heavily recently. And I think having athletes talk about mental health and having athletes expressing the challenges of what it is to be an athlete, like it's not a normal job. Like there's a lot more high stake that goes into it. It's not something like that we're so hard on ourselves. And I think that's the biggest thing is I was always like, man, I'm so hard on myself. Like if I don't have a good competition, like I genuinely get like so upset over it, or it's something that really affects me, or if I don't have a good training, and being able to balance what that is like. I mean, Team New Zealand or Athletics New Zealand or even our committee have definitely made that a little bit more of a forefront when it comes to if athletes are talking about it. So for us, we have a really good team on board. And I think it's who you have on your team is going to be the one who's going to help you directly. So through high performance sport, they in New Zealand, they've been able to give us a team, and for me that's like my sports psych is definitely my go-to in times like that, who can really help me. So he's someone who's almost readily available at like any time for me, which is amazing. I almost talk to him every week, every second week, if there's anything there. And then they connect up with our sports doctor as well. So even the last few months that I've had like a little bit of mental challenges, I've been able to go to them about it, and they've been able to help me through a lot of different things, which to have that support is really amazing, because almost not everyone gets that support. Mental health, and especially in New Zealand, it's one of those things that doesn't get as much recognition or funding as we would like. I know it's all around the world, but our I guess our mental health issues and problems and the rates in New Zealand are really, really high. And so I think as an athlete, being able to get that support is amazing. But it's hard to know that not everyone is getting that support, and even other athletes sometimes don't. So having that support myself from Team New Zealand and Athletics New Zealand and high performance sport allows me to balance that a lot better, and having a sports psych on board is something that's just like the biggest game changer, and being able to interact with them and talk to them about anything that's going on, whether it's sport or outside of sport, because we know that those two things definitely do correlate as well.
I think it's really interesting that you pinpointed those nerves ahead of time and the transition to seeing them as a positive ahead of competition, because I don't think that anyone particularly tells you how to transition those. You just have to kind of figure it out yourself. What was your process to getting to that point?
Yeah, you're so right. It's one of those things that almost isn't isn't talked about. You're kind of like, if you have nerves, it almost goes two ways. You either see it as being really exciting and making the most of those nerves and taking them on board, or scare, or a little bit scary as well. And that comes back to that fear aspect, being afraid to fail, or being afraid to what those nerves mean, and attaching different thoughts to them and trying to understand what it is. And I think when you're a lot younger and you're feeling these sorts of things, such as nerves, you're like, oh, this feels like a bad thing. I don't know what I'm doing. And especially in gymnastics, I'd be like on the beam, and the beam would be like shaking because I'm so nervous. It's, you almost connect it up to a bad thing or something that you don't really know how to understand. And for myself, when I went into pole vaulting, I still felt them. And it took a few years to actually understand them and break them down, and talking to my sports psych, but then also having different experiences that attach to these nerves. It was trying to understand, right, like this is something that actually helps me to compete well. And I connected them up to the adrenaline that I would get from a competition as well. I see myself as very much so a competitor. I love competing. I've almost always like competed a lot better than I train as well, which obviously it's better to be that way, even when training's possibly not going as well. But connecting those nerves to adrenaline, and then that adrenaline to knowing that that's what I feel in competition. That's what I associate competition with. And I associate myself as a competitor. So it's sort of like a bit of a process in understanding them and choosing. And I do think you can choose at the time when you feel those nerves. Are these exciting nerves, or are they fearful? Like, is this something that's going to inhibit me, or is it something that's going to help my performance even more? And so I almost think I got to a stage where I was telling myself, and I had to flip that switch to, these are good. These help you compete well. These help you feel that adrenaline. This is just you getting excited, rather than this is you getting scared. So I think it was just almost making myself flip that switch, and then actually starting to feel it even more. And I'm not sure if I would say like fake it till you make it sort of thing, but it was almost telling myself that this is what is going to help you to compete well. And when you do feel these, that's when you compete a lot better. But even if I don't feel them, I don't associate that as I'm not going to compete better. It's just like differences in different competitions, and understanding that they are a good thing, and it's something that you can learn to use in your tool belt rather than inhibit you.
Let's talk about 2019 now. So you have a fourth place finish in Italy, and then an accident.
Accident was before that.
Okay, so the accident was before the fourth place finish. Talk me through that accident, because watch the video. And is it just, it's when you're working with any kind of prop, something has to happen at some point, but does that ever go through your mind that this pole could snap?
Yeah, I mean, not before 2019. After that, definitely. But yeah, I mean, you hear of other athletes snapping poles and you kind of see it like, oh, that's a freak accident. That wouldn't really happen to me. I now look back, I've snapped 4 poles in my career. 2019 being the first of, I guess, the serious ones. At a pole vault competition in March or April. It was an exhibition meet as well, so it was below the Sky Tower, which is Auckland's biggest attraction, and it was quite a big crowd. It was a fairly big competition, the last one of the season. So one of my first attempts at 4 meters 40 and go to take off into it, and the pole snaps, just falls into three different places, snaps, and I'm on the mat kind of trying to understand what it is that just happened. Like, it happens just like this. It's so loud. It happened in literally a split second, and I felt my hand straight away ping with, it wasn't pain, because I think it was just so much shock that happened at once. I was just like, something's not right in there. I've just snapped a pole, started to realize what actually happened. At the time, was super scary. Sort of walked over, was holding my hand, walked over to my coach. He was asking if I was okay. I walked back on the runway just to get some of my stuff, and then my physio was there at the time. And I remember I wanted to keep competing. And I was like, do you think like I'd be able to? Which at the time I was like, why? And she even said, she was like, I don't think there's anything structurally wrong with it. She had a little look at it, and then I was like, okay, how cool would that be to like go for this again? Like, I don't want to leave like having broken a pole and not trying another pole vault again and not like finishing the competition, which looking back is kind of crazy. But going back to pole vaulting after that injury, I didn't want it to be associated like straight away with the last time you pole vaulted, you snapped a pole. So I was like, right, I do want to give this another go. My hand was so sore. I didn't know what was wrong with it, but it was pretty sore at the time. And I was like, I just want to go for another attempt. Like, I just want to try this again. Went onto a pole up. So I had to, obviously didn't have that pole that I was on before, so I had to go onto another one. And went for another attempt. And didn't quite get it, but I mean, I'm still happy that I sort of gave it a go. But then afterwards, I was in so much pain, and that night was even worse. And so got the diagnosis, and I had completely fractured my trapezium in my hand. So like, not even just like a little bit of a fracture, like completely broke apart. Like, the x-ray was like, whoa, you did a good job of that. Which makes sense. Like, after breaking a pole, it's almost like a luck of the draw thing. Either you break a bone, or the amount of force that's going through your hand at that point just can completely shatter it. So that's what happened. And it was a pretty tough process to try to get back from, because I had the World University Champs and Oceanias. I think it was 10 weeks after, something like that. Which I had to go get surgery. I had to get put in a cast for 6 weeks and have a full turnaround of that in a very short amount of time. So it was like one of my first major injuries that I had to come back from, which it was such a different experience, because I hadn't had a challenge like that before. Well, I sort of had the year before, but of surgery. Even the word surgery kind of scared me a lot. So coming back from that injury was pretty difficult. And even the mental space of that, having snapped a pole, I had to work really, really hard alongside my sports psych to make sure that there wouldn't be an inhibiting factor when I came back to the sport, because it's something that it is, I guess you could say, like traumatic. It's a trauma response when you snap that pole and get an injury that bad from it. So I remember trying to visualize my vaulting, because I tried a lot of visualization in that time to make sure that I was, when I came back to it, I was pole vaulting right. And every time that I would try to visualize a pole vault, I would snap the pole again. And that was just so difficult, because I was like, I can't even visualize myself pole vaulting without this snapping. Like, how am I going to actually pole vault again? Not pole vault again, but like be able to get back into that space of feeling confident. So that took many, many times, but I think the fact that I had to be ready for this competition, like a really big competition, World University Games, as well as Oceanias, I didn't really have a choice. And I think for me, that was a really good thing, like that I had something else in that time to know I had to be competing for. Like I said, I'm a competitor. So knowing I had a big competition to get ready for was what sort of made that process a little bit easier, but tried to block out those mental blocks when it came to poles as well. And it meant that I changed the poles I was on, which made it a little bit easier, kind of.
Did that fourth place finish then reinforce the fact that you had succeeded in your visualization?
Yeah, I think for the World University Games, I got through to the final, but then I also didn't really know where I was placed, I guess. Like, I went into that competition hoping, yes, let's get through to the final, top 10 finish would be amazing. And I just kept going through the competition and realizing that the girls weren't quite jumping as high as I thought they would be, which then gave myself an opportunity to do quite well. And that was fourth, which I jumped the same height as third. Damn count back. It's one of those things that I've definitely learned you need to be getting them first attempts. But yeah, definitely reinforced the last few months of going through a struggle and knowing I had to come back for that competition. And like I said, I'm a competitor. I wanted to compete well. I wanted to wear, I guess, New Zealand on my chest with pride. And it always comes back to having gone through a struggle or a challenge. It feels so much better when you succeed out of it. And so I was really proud of myself, even though it wasn't quite the height that I wanted. It was a consistent height, 430, that I knew I could do on any given day, really. It wasn't that close to my PB, which as an athlete, I'm always a little bit hard on myself. I was like, oh man, if I'd jumped a little bit higher, then that would have got me in third or got me a podium. But I think after the few months I'd had, it was something that could just reinforce. You put so much work into getting this rehabbed and getting it better. It's maybe not the height you wanted, but it's a height that can be sort of commended on a world stage as fourth at the World University Games is still a pretty good result.
And then what were you doing between that stretch of 2019 and 2020 when you represented New Zealand?
Yeah, 2019 to 2020, I guess, like the end of that season, that was a bit of a tough season for me. 2019. Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, like 2019, 2020, I wasn't quite doing the heights that I wanted to. It was almost a point, and I still got like I think it was a 1 or a 5 centimeter PB, which is good to be getting personal bests every year, but that had sort of slowed down a little bit more after such a high from when I was 16, 17, 18. I think it was the time where I actually slowed down a little bit. I just took time to, I guess, reevaluate what I was doing and what the path that I was on. Not reevaluating it, but just trying to understand how can I get to that next level. Like always trying to understand that, and it took a bit of an average season for me to do that. And then I guess 2020 is when COVID hit a little bit more, and we were put into a position where we weren't really able to compete internationally. But having that not so good season, which 2020 we thought was going to be the Olympics. So I think almost that season is what took a massive perspective shift, because every single competition that I was doing, I was like, right, I have to do well for this to go to the Olympics. Like I should be jumping this. I need to be doing this. And those words, I just should, need to, have to, were just like inhibiting my performance, because I didn't feel like that fun and that like enjoyment factor came into it very much. And I remember a few athletes saying like, oh, they've kind of lost that enjoyment factor, or they're not having as much fun. I was like, what do you mean? Like, how do you not love your sport anymore? Like, I didn't understand it until that season where I was jumping heights I didn't quite, I wasn't really that proud of. My training wasn't going the best, and I was running through a lot, so not committing to my jumps, because I guess you could say pressure got to me. The dream that I'd always had, which was the Olympics, and that was my season to try qualify for it. And I was jumping heights like 40s and 30s. I wasn't in that 50, 60 zone like I wanted to be, because every competition I was like, I have to do well at this. I felt so much pressure. I even had like some people around me saying, like, this competition is one you have to do well, and like this is what's going to help you get points for the Olympics. And I was like, oh, like every single competition I'm trying to do well, like it shouldn't change. And that's something I definitely realized out of that, but nothing really should be changing. You're wanting to do well at every single competition. So that was a perspective shift from that season. It was an interesting one. Yeah.
And then once you did fail to qualify for the Olympics, what were you focused on at that point?
Well, I guess 2020, and it was pretty late that they changed it. They said that the Olympics would be postponed to 2021, which I was hard for a lot of athletes. I'd say the ones that were a little bit older, but for me, being so young, I was like, right, I've got a whole another year to try qualify. So I used the opportunity to try change a lot of things in my, I guess, in my tool belt, to try understand how can I be a better athlete to become an Olympian. I knew this wasn't just the Commonwealth Games, the World Universities. It was a big one, the Big O show, which I've been looking forward to my whole entire life. I was like, right, I have another year. I need to get my A into G and figure out what it is to get me to the Olympics, which took that whole next season. And it took some changes in my team as well. So I changed my strength coach. I think it was 2019. I changed my sports psych and a few other people. So I was like, to get the right people on board, the people that I'm going to know and trust. And I was feeling really, really good in my prep of doing that. Obviously, I was still like really nervous and had that pressure of the Olympics. It was always just in the back of my head, like, the Olympics. And it wasn't coming back to, what do I need to do to get here? What are the little things that are going to help me to get to the big one, which 2020 again 2021 was pretty rough, because I had another pole snap, which I was like, oh man. It was in the period I had just jumped 4 meters 55, which was a personal best for me at the time. And I was like, right, I'm on the right track. I'm doing well. It's something that I'm like this close to getting there. And the competition afterwards, I got a PB. I snapped another pole. And I was just devastated. As soon as I was on the mat, I was like, I know I've done something to my hand again. I know this is going to be a setback. And as soon as I sat in pole, I'm like, right, I'm not going to the Olympics. That's my dream over, just like that. Like, wanting to go to the Tokyo ones. And it was devastating. I had to come back from it. And again, it was talking to my team, and they were like, right, we'll get you back in 10 weeks and then try a few more competitions. So I had to rehab that whole thing. I'd known what to do, and I came back from it as well as I could have, but it took away that streak of doing well. Like, I just got a PB and I was in that zone, and I had another setback. And we had 3 competitions. So myself and Eliza had 3 competitions to qualify. We're in a similar point. She'd was trying to get back from an injury. And I had hers was a lot worse, but I was trying to come back to it. And 3 competitions with that pressure is really difficult, because 4 meters 70 was the height that we had to do to qualify. And I knew that it just wasn't quite in my reach as much as I wanted to believe it was. It was a little bit too far away for me, and it was a really tough process to realize on that third competition when neither of us had got that height, and we knew we weren't going to the Olympics. It was tough. We both broke down crying. I guess it was just like such a rough moment because it's something we'd worked towards for so long, and it was such a big thing that the pressure had sort of got to us. The fact that I had an injury just sent me back even more. And getting that notice, that letter saying that I couldn't, was just, right, that's set in stone. I just need to sort of get away from that. But yeah, it was definitely tough in those few months.
So we've talked about the broad, how do you go about pole vaulting? Let's talk about the minuscule failures. When you get over the bar and you watch it teeter and then you watch it fall, what are you thinking?
When the bar's coming down after not getting the attempt? It depends on the competition.
I mean, like, do you watch it in slow motion?
Yeah, especially if the bar gives you like a little bit of hope and there's like a little bit of a teeter in the bar, and then it comes off and you're like, oh, damn. Because sometimes you get bar love and you hit it and it stays on, and other times it comes off. But I don't know, it's you get 3 attempts, and if that's on your 3rd attempt, it's super hard. That's the competition over. Depending on the time, if it's a no height, if it's on your 1st attempt and you've gone out at all 3, that's gut wrenching. That's one of those ones you don't want to have too many no heights, and it takes a little bit to come back from. But I don't know, I think just seeing that bar up there, and if you see it coming down on a height that you've really been wanting, it's really hard, because if it's a height you have in your head, like 460 for me for so long was a height that I knew I was capable of, and just every competition I wasn't quite getting it. And if I was going for 460 and it coming down or hitting it on the way up, it was like, damn, like I just have to keep going. Like I know it's there and I know how close I am, but in pole vaulting there's so many little things that go into it. Like you've got the changing the uprights, what pole you need to be on, what the flexes are, what your runway's doing, where your takeoff spots are. Like you're looking at tiny little centimeters in pole vault that make the biggest difference, which is the most frustrating part of it, but also something that like keeps us as like perfectionists and wanting to do more and keep like trying to find what it is that's going to make that difference, I guess.
And then in 2022, you represented New Zealand at the World Athletics Indoor Championship in Serbia. And you didn't have poles.
Yeah. So I was invited pretty much a week out from the competition, which ideally, I mean, we just had the New Zealand Championships where I jumped 4 meters 65, which I knew was one of those heights that would open up some doors for me. I didn't know they would open up those doors a week later to one of the biggest competitions I've done, which was really exciting. But I thought the selection date was gone. I didn't even really have that in my head. I was actually about to go on holiday for a couple of days, and it was when I was driving down the coast that I got a call from my athletics sort of manager, and she said, "You've been invited by World Athletics to compete at the World Indoors." And I was like, I'm on my way to the beach, but like it was crazy. It was the World Indoors I've always seen as, and it pretty much is one of the hardest competitions to get into. 471 is the automatic qualifier, and then they take the athletes down from there. So I knew that 65 was one of those heights that could put me in that sort of ranking, but I didn't think I thought the selection was completely over. And getting that invitation, she was like, right, I need an answer by the end of the day, because it was very quick moving. I pretty much shot it within the hour. I was like, yeah, I'm going. Like, let's try to make this happen. I was so excited. She had to try book flights and get poles sorted. So we had some flights, and we thought that we had my poles on those flights. It's very hard to travel with poles. So it wasn't until the Wednesday that I was actually leaving. The Tuesday night, she said that we can't get the poles onto the flights. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So between her, luckily there wasn't too much stress on me. It was herself and my coach sorted to buy some poles from Poland,
I
ironically
love
enough.
that.
Buy 4 poles and get them driven 14 hours to Serbia. And so we paid someone to do that, buy the poles, get that sorted, get me on a flight. That flight got me to the competition, or to Serbia, 2 days before I competed, which from New Zealand to Serbia, my dad actually told me this the day before I left. He was like, funnily enough, Serbia and Auckland are the 2 furthest away major cities that you can get. Like from Serbia, like Auckland is the biggest like main city that's pretty much the furthest away. Like you couldn't really get further away from Serbia. So that was like a 30+ hour trip to get there. Obviously changing time zones, a week of trying to figure out what it was, what my jet lag had to be, when I had to be sleeping, what my nutrition would be, what would be different in pretty much such a short amount of time, talking to all my team. That I got to the competition, and the day before I took the poles fresh out of their tubes and taped them up. So brand new poles, I'd never competed on. Normally for us in a tube, we'd have about 10 poles or 8 poles that we'd go through. So I didn't have my in-between poles. I just had full flexes of just 4, when normally I would have 8 or 10 poles. So that in itself was a little bit of a challenge. I made it work pretty well, given the circumstances, I think. Because everything happened all at once, and I had such a short time space, I didn't even have time to think. I was just so excited to be going to this competition. That was one of the biggest ones with some international athletes, that the pole situation was something I had to deal with, but it meant that I didn't have to travel with poles going over, which I guess was good, but it was definitely a mission going into it. Yeah.
Do things like breaking your poles and having to get a new one, or buying totally new poles for a huge competition and leaving the ones that you trust and have practiced on at home, does that play into pre-performance stress, because that's such an undetermined factor?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. And I mean, after I snapped my 4th pole, we transitioned onto a different brand of pole. So I'm now on Paces, which are made out of fiberglass rather than carbon fiber, because I kept snapping the carbon fiber ones because they're a lot more prone to that. So I went onto the fiberglass poles, and so the poles that we had just freshly bought I did have the same flex ones back home. So they were the same flex and stiffness. So it sort of meant that I was familiar with them, even though they were fresh out of the box, really. It meant that I could almost trust them, not more, but they were completely fresh. I knew that they were going to give me what I needed to, but stress is definitely the word that went into it a little bit. The day before taping them up, was just realizing I've never even jumped on these poles before. But funnily enough, they were the ones that I was still familiar with, because they were the same type of them as back home. So I was able to be more confident in that. But even before that, we were talking about, do we possibly borrow poles? Then realizing that out of the 13 girls that were there, no one was on the same poles as me. So I couldn't do that. That's why we had to buy them. So yeah, I mean, when you're working with implements, you can be quite particular with them. So I was like, I'm not sure I want to be borrowing poles of a completely different type. So to have those poles there and to the last minute buy 4 poles and get them driven was, I was really grateful that we were able to do that, rather than having to borrow poles that I had no experience on, because they are very different.
And then with the poles that you did have, you set a PB.
It's 5 centimeters below my PB, but
okay.
Still.
But that put you in sixth place.
Yeah.
Were you happy with that result, or were you striving for more? You're always striving for more, but was that enough for the time being?
Yeah, I think it was. I was really happy with that placing, because obviously the amount of stress that went into getting there, the fact that I didn't even think I'd be invited to be selected. Like, they take the 12 best in the world at that point of time. A few had injuries and a few weren't able to make it, so that bumped me up. But that was there at the World Indoor Championships with 12 of the fittest and healthiest, best pole vaulters in the world. And to be one of those going to that competition was just like, this is incredible. Like, I'm finally able to feel this. I didn't know if I would feel like I belonged because I hadn't quite been there to a competition that big before. But I got there and I walked up into the stadium and I was like, right, I belong here. Like, this is what I'm so excited for. This is what I've been waiting for. Like, a lot of my career is this feeling to be jumping with these girls that I've looked up to for so long. So it almost felt like a similar experience to the Commonwealth Games, where it's not quite the placing I wanted, but I had two things I wanted to get out of it, to have fun and to learn as much as I could. Two simple things, and make sure that I gave every jump the best that I could. My coach wasn't able to go either, so between, which I never used these as an excuse at the time, but looking back, between not having a coach, getting poles last minute, flying in 2 days before, getting like minimal sleep, was to be able to go out there and get 5 centimeters below my personal best, which that's nothing. Like, that 460 was a height that I've only done 2 times before that. And it finished off my season so well because the top 8 placing is really good. And for my first major international championship, Commonwealth Games sort of counts, but not really. Like, this was my first major. With the best of the best was, I mean, I could have been happy with a 470, but at the same time, I'd pretty much taken that week off because I was away. And then I didn't have much prep going into it. My training wasn't that good. The week leading into it, I barely vaulted. Was just like, to be able to perform that well, given the circumstances, gave me so much hope, because it means that when everything does come together and I'm prepared for a major championship, I can hit that so hard and be so ready for it. But that was just an amazing experience in itself. It felt like I was 18-year-old Olivia again, being able to experience something for the first time almost. Like, the day before I went, I almost just had like a little bit of a happy cry. Like, I was so emotional that I'd like been selected for like such a big competition, because the year before I'd been obviously not selected from the Olympics, and that was something really hard to go through. And this was a competition that was going to be those girls that were at the Olympics, and I'm going to be competing with them, and I deserve this. And I've gone through quite a bit to get here, which made it that much sweeter. The fact that so much went into that competition and I was able to perform at my best. Like, I mean, I'm not sure how many other athletes did vault like that close to their personal best, whereas I was able to go there and perform. And I think Kiwis, us New Zealand athletes, do quite well on the world stage and the world platform. So to be able to go out there and perform the best I could with New Zealand on my chest was something I could be really proud of.
Let's talk more about the world stage. Paris 2024?
Yes, definitely. Like, I almost have no doubt in my mind that I'll be there, which is really exciting, because I've had doubt for a while, especially after Tokyo. But I'm a completely different athlete from 2020. I've grown so much to get to where I am now, and I'm like, I know I can get to Paris. That's one that I can hopefully go into as a competitor as well. This is one that I've sort of been waiting for, and I know that I'll be 24 in a pretty good position. Having done the heights that I have now, I don't want to be worrying about qualifying. It has been a big thing for me. Like, I've always sort of worried about getting into a competition, whereas I want to be at that point where, right, I'm in and I'm a competitor. I don't need to worry about that too much. So I'm very excited. Yeah.
So between now and then, what can we look forward to hearing from you?
Between now and then, it's big. I mean, there's so many different things going to it. In a few months in July, we've got the World Outdoor Championships. So that'll be my first outdoor Worlds. And then another Commonwealth Games. And then another World Championships. There's so many competitions within that time. leading into the Olympics that I can really be putting my name out there and getting that same experience as world indoors, competing with all those other girls and on that world stage of these big competitions I've pretty much been waiting for so long. You could argue since 2018. I'm ready. I finally belong in that space, and I'm just so excited to be able to see what those next, I guess, 2 years hold. It's almost quite a blessing in disguise that we've got not an extra year, a year less, like it's 3 years since the last one. So that gives me a little bit of time, but also I'm definitely going to be able to be in the right shape to get there. Like it gets me excited just thinking about it.
That's why I wanted to close this interview with that question, because I feel like you're, knock on wood, but I feel like you're in a really good place in your career right now. And I'm excited to see what happens.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting. Like I feel like it's been so long to actually get to this point, and even like from the Olympics, when I was watching it, you see so many other athletes and you just know that every single one of them has gone through some sort of struggle, because you see that like excitement and joy in their face when they do well, and you're like, they're happy they've done well, but they're relieved because all athletes go through different struggles, and that's what makes that outcome or that success so much sweeter, because you know what you've gone through. And you know, for me, it's been like a bit of a rough few years, and even the last few months have been hard, but something that I've known I've been able to get through. So it just makes me even more excited for the next few years, because I'm no longer afraid of failure. I'm not really scared of that anymore. I just know that I can get through and I can perform when I need to, which is the biggest thing, I think. Yeah.
And like I was saying, you have about 2 months until your interview goes out. If there's anything that comes up between now and then, just send me a DM or an email so I can update that in the script. And do you have any questions for me? Anything that you think that we missed about your story?
I don't think so. I mean, there's been like a lot of different things happen throughout the years. I guess there sort of is a part of that where like I changed like a few people in my team that like made quite a big difference, which was, I mean, creating a little bit of, I mean, I can touch on it a little bit if that's right. Like
the floor is yours.
Some like the athlete autonomy is one of those things that I've sort of realized a lot more, is taking control as an athlete and figuring out what works for you. So for me, it was changing a few people in my team, because I think it takes quite a lot to realize possibly what you're doing may work for everyone else, but doesn't necessarily work for yourself. And so creating that change and going out of the norm and out of the pathway that sort of everyone had been set on, I guess you could say, meant I changed my team, which made a really big difference in terms of the strength aspect. But the last few months leading into the season, I was programming myself, which was quite difficult every week. I have no strength programming background at all. So doing that for 3 months leading into quite a big season and still doing well was a big perspective shift, because I knew that I was putting so much intention to what I was doing. And I think intention is such a big word going into it. If you know why you're doing what you're doing and how it's helping you, it makes the biggest difference. It's like you can give 2 people the same program, but if someone has intention doing it and the other person is just going through the motions, obviously the first person is going to get so much more out of it. And I think that's been a big thing that I've realized, is like, if you know what's going to help you in your journey, and if you know what it is that's going to make the biggest difference in terms of having that ownership, like can give you a little bit of power in realizing what it is that can make you the best athlete you can, rather than sort of just always collaborating rather than just listening to what someone else is saying, and actually knowing why you're doing what you're doing has been a big difference for me. So I just kind of wanted to put that little aspect in there, because it's really good to have that ownership sometimes. But then I'll start getting a new person on my team now, but it's just like quite a difference that can come into it if you understand what it is, each motion, and actually knowing those different things that go into it, I guess. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we conclude this interview?
I don't think so. I think that possibly, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Any questions you have for me before we hang up?
Not really.
That's fine too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will talk to you once this episode comes out. I hope you love it. Good luck with everything. I hope I get to see you at Paris 2024. That would be amazing.
Hopefully. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. You too. Thanks for having me.
Bye.